Are blind dates outdated? It sounds like a simple question, almost playful, almost nostalgic. It brings to mind awkward dinners, nervous laughter, forced smiles, and the hope that somehow, against all odds, chemistry might appear out of thin air. But this question is not really about dating. It is about how we connect. It is about how much control we think we need before we allow ourselves to be seen. It is about whether we still believe in surprise, in risk, in the unfamiliar, and in the quiet courage it takes to meet another human being without filters, algorithms, or guarantees. We live in a world obsessed with certainty. We swipe, scroll, filter, and refine. We want to know everything before we show up. We want to see the photos, read the bio, check the interests, compare values, and calculate compatibility before we even say hello. We want proof that something will work before we give it a chance. And in that world, blind dates feel almost reckless. They feel inefficient. They feel like a relic from a time when people trusted more and analyzed less. But maybe the better question is not whether blind dates are outdated. Maybe the real question is whether we have become too afraid of the unknown. A blind date, at its core, is an act of trust. It is someone saying, "I do not know exactly what will happen, but I am willing to show up anyway." It is an agreement to step into uncertainty with openness instead of suspicion. And that idea feels increasingly rare in a culture that teaches us to protect ourselves at all costs, to curate our image carefully, and to avoid discomfort whenever possible. Think about how much energy we spend trying to eliminate surprises from our lives. We track our steps, our sleep, our calories, our productivity. We plan our careers years in advance. We rehearse conversations before we have them. We Google people before we meet them. We want to know who someone is before we let them tell us themselves. And in doing so, we sometimes forget that discovery is part of the magic. Blind dates were never just about romance. They were about allowing someone else to introduce a variable into your life. They were about saying, "I trust your judgment enough to believe this encounter is worth my time." And more importantly, they were about giving yourself permission to be present instead of pre-informed. When you walk into a blind date, you are not comparing someone to a mental checklist built from photos and profiles. You are not distracted by expectations shaped by curated online personas. You are simply there. You are listening to a voice, watching expressions, noticing energy. You are experiencing a person as they are in that moment, not as they have been edited to appear. And that experience demands something from you. It demands patience. It demands curiosity. It demands the ability to sit with discomfort if the conversation is slow or the chemistry is unclear. It demands that you stay long enough to let something unfold instead of making a snap judgment in the first 30 seconds. We like to believe we know instantly whether someone is right for us. We call it intuition, but often, it is just familiarity. We are drawn to what feels recognizable, even if it is not healthy, even if it is not fulfilling. Blind dates disrupt that pattern. They remove the familiar signals and force us to engage differently. Now, of course, not every blind date leads to love. Many lead to awkward silences, polite goodbyes, and stories you laugh about later. But the value of a blind date was never guaranteed success. The value was the practice of openness. The value was learning how to meet someone without armor. In a time when so many people feel lonely despite being constantly connected, that practice matters. We have more ways than ever to meet people, and yet many feel more isolated than previous generations. We have access to thousands of potential matches, and yet commitment feels harder. We can talk to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and still feel unseen. That tells us something important. Connection is not about access. It is about presence. Blind dates required presence. There was no phone to hide behind. No quick exit disguised as a notification. No endless stream of alternatives waiting in your pocket. When you agreed to meet, you committed to the moment. And in that commitment, something human happened. You learned how to sit across from someone and hold eye contact. You learned how to listen without multitasking. You learned how to ask questions because you were genuinely curious, not because you had already read the answers online. You learned how to be yourself without performing for an invisible audience. Today, many interactions feel like auditions. We are constantly aware that we are being evaluated. We curate ourselves accordingly. We choose words carefully. We present highlights instead of honesty. And while that might increase matches, it often decreases intimacy. A blind date stripped away the performance. You showed up as you were, and the other person did the same. There was no brand to maintain. No image to protect. Just two people sharing time. So are blind dates outdated? Or have we outgrown our tolerance for vulnerability? It is easy to dismiss blind dates as inefficient. Why waste time meeting someone you might not like when technology can narrow the field for you? But efficiency is not always the goal when it comes to human connection. Some of the most meaningful moments in life are inefficient. They take time. They involve trial and error. They involve emotional risk. Friendships are inefficient. Creativity is inefficient. Healing is inefficient. Love, especially, is inefficient. And yet we value these things precisely because they cannot be optimized. Blind dates remind us that not everything worthwhile can be predicted. They remind us that attraction is complex, that chemistry cannot always be reduced to shared interests or compatible schedules. They remind us that sometimes, someone surprises us, and that surprise changes us. Think about the moments in your life that altered your path. Chances are, many of them were unplanned. A conversation you did not expect. A person you almost did not meet. A decision you made without full information. Those moments carry weight because they required courage. Blind dates were small acts of courage. They were practice rounds for a bigger truth. That growth often begins where certainty ends. Now, this does not mean we should abandon modern tools or romanticize the past blindly. Technology has made connection more accessible for many people who might otherwise struggle to meet others. It has expanded possibilities. It has broken down barriers. That matters. But the question is not whether one approach is better than the other. The question is what we lose when we eliminate unpredictability entirely. When we rely too heavily on pre-screening, we risk turning people into data points. We risk confusing compatibility on paper with compatibility in life. We risk missing out on connections that do not fit our preconceived boxes but might have grown into something meaningful if given time. Blind dates forced us to confront our assumptions. They challenged our biases. They made us aware of how quickly we judge and how often we are wrong. And beyond romance, this lesson applies to life itself. How often do we avoid opportunities because we cannot see the outcome clearly? How often do we say no because we are afraid of wasting time, looking foolish, or being disappointed? How often do we wait for certainty before we act, not realizing that certainty rarely comes before the first step? A blind date is a metaphor for growth. It says, you do not need all the answers to begin. You only need willingness. Willingness to be present. Willingness to listen. Willingness to learn. Willingness to be changed, even slightly, by the encounter. Even when a blind date does not lead to romance, it often leaves something behind. A new perspective. A reminder of what you value. A clearer sense of what you want or do not want. A story. A moment of human connection that breaks the routine. And in a world that often feels repetitive and predictable, those moments matter more than we admit. There is also something deeply respectful about blind dates. They rely on community. On someone saying, I know you, and I know them, and I think you might enjoy meeting. That kind of recommendation is rooted in care, not algorithms. It is imperfect, yes, but it is human. We used to trust people to introduce us to other people. We trusted relationships to be bridges. Today, we often bypass that and go straight to platforms designed to maximize engagement, not fulfillment. That shift has consequences. When connection becomes transactional, it becomes fragile. When people feel interchangeable, commitment weakens. Blind dates, for all their awkwardness, reminded us that each encounter was singular. This person, at this time, in this place. Not endlessly replaceable. So maybe blind dates are not outdated. Maybe they are just uncomfortable in a culture that prioritizes comfort. Discomfort is not the enemy. Avoiding discomfort is. Growth lives in the space where things are uncertain. Confidence is built by showing up without guarantees. Authenticity is practiced when we stop curating and start engaging. Imagine approaching life the way you would a blind date. Not reckless, but open. Prepared, but not rigid. Curious rather than defensive. Imagine saying yes to experiences without needing to know exactly how they will turn out. You might fail. You might feel awkward. You might be disappointed. But you might also be surprised. You might discover something new about yourself. You might meet someone who challenges your assumptions. You might grow. Blind dates taught us that not every meeting needs to be optimized. Some just need to be experienced. And perhaps that is the deeper message here. In an age of endless choice, the real courage is choosing to stay present with one person, one moment, one conversation, without constantly wondering what else is out there. Whether or not blind dates make a comeback is not the point. The point is what they represent. Openness, trust, willingness, presence. These qualities are never outdated. The next time you find yourself hesitating to try something because you cannot predict the outcome, remember the spirit of the blind date. Remember that life is not a profile you can scroll through in advance. It is something you step into, moment by moment, without guarantees. And maybe, just maybe, the most meaningful connections you will ever have are waiting on the other side of uncertainty, asking only one thing of you: to show up.